A video has emerged of pro-CCP propagandist Victor Gao claiming the 2016 arbitral ruling in favor of Manila was invalid. Watch.
Arbitration without consent is a violation of the rule of law. I say this as an alumni from Yale Law School. I say this as an attorney at law.
Meanwhile, the Philippines is bolstering its support. It's just inked a defense cooperation deal on a visit by Vietnam's naval chief to Manila, plus a US Ohio-class nuclear-powered attack submarine and also a UK frigate docked in the Philippines to show their nation's support. So, as Beijing escalates its coercion and bluffs its way through the South China Sea, what's next? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Min Kavat. To discuss these stories and more, we're joined by Chong-Li Lee, National Zhengzhi University Institute of International Relations Professor and Research Fellow, and Renato Cruz de Castro, National Zhengzhi University MOFA Taiwan Fellow. Professor Lee, Renato, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
As China ramps up its political warfare against Taiwan, is it doing the same against the Philippines? With a video emerging of pro-CCP propagandist Victor Gao falsely asserting the 2016 arbitral ruling was invalid because China did not, quote, consent to arbitration.
I also say this as a Chinese national. I can bring you to court whether you agree it or not, but I will never be able to drag you into arbitration without your consent, because arbitration without consent is a violation of rule of law.
This is the response by Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson Jay Tariala. China's claim that the award is invalid because it did not participate in the proceedings is baseless under UNCLOS, to which China is a party. Under Article 286, parties are obliged to settle disputes through peaceful means, including binding arbitration under Part 15. By ratifying UNCLOS in 1996, China accepted these compulsory procedures. Article 287 permits states to choose a forum, but in the absence of such a choice, arbitration under Annex 7 applies, a basis invoked by the Philippines in its 2013 notification. The tribunal confirmed jurisdiction over the Philippines' submissions, clarifying that China's objections did not bar it from ruling on maritime entitlements under UNCLOS. So, Renato, let me come to you first. I'll let you respond to this.
I'm kind of reluctant to respond to it because I'm not a lawyer, but I will just have to...
You're not a Yale-educated lawyer like Victor Gao.
Yes, of course, very intimidating. If you're an academic like me, which doesn't have a law degree, it's very intimidating to be confronted by a legal expert. But I would have to rely on two of my good friends in the Philippines who have basically answered this. Number one, of course, is Professor Jay Batong Bakal from the University of Philippines Law School, and of course, Associate Justice Antonio Carpio would basically said, China is basically, of course, the goal of China is to use law to undermine the July 12, 2016 Arbitral Tribunal ruling. That's been consistent, starting, of course, from their earlier statement when the ruling came out on July 12, 2016, it's just a piece of paper. Now they're basically saying, go back to the basic that you have, the notion of arbitration. But as mentioned in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, it provides, of course, for arbitration.
I mean, the way that China has built its case is because under international law, arbitration must happen with consent. Mm-hmm. But what is the difference in this case?
I think China is good at using, unilateral use the legal initiative to defend or protect their own interests. So I guess they will create some new arguments and claim that it's basically under international law.
There's a difference between just international law where consent is required for arbitration, but the point here is that they have signed up to UNCLOS.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. In a way, UNCLOS is unique. It's different, primarily because of the fact that it created certain new legal norms for example, of course, compulsory arbitration. So I've become a party of UNCLOS, given the fact that it's a very complicated situation that once, of course, you have the UNCLOS taking the effect that we'll have this exclusive economic zone, it will create a lot of disputes.
Yeah, because Professor Lee, I mean, it can't be so easy, isn't it, that if China who is generally the perpetrator in maritime law and in this region, says, I don't want to be party to it, and then nobody can do anything under UNCLOS. So obviously there must be the provision where, in fact, they are still bound.
I think that once you sign the treaty, you have to be abided by what's said in treaty. So it's kind of very annoying if you don't abide by the treaty, and then who will trust you for your future behaviors.
Right. That's right. And we joked about Renato, Victor Gao talking about his Yale degree and being an attorney at law. But those are very calculated, references, aren't they? Are they a way to mask what is essentially false, which is basically lawfare as opposed to law?
Yeah, of course. Just like what happened, of course, regarding Taiwan. Again, I'm not a legal expert, but I can only basically rely on my knowledge regarding when, of course, they took the seat at the United Nations Security Council. That resolution, I believe, that UN resolution, General Assembly resolution, does not remove Taiwan from the United Nations itself. But again, this is the usual Chinese narrative. So you have to always take it with a grain of salt.
Right. Now, the UK frigate HMS Richmond visited Manila last month, delivering a letter that could result in the presence of British troops in the South China Sea. The letter conveyed the interest of the UK Defence Secretary in negotiating a visiting forces agreement with the Philippines. In addition, a US Ohio-class nuclear ballistic missile submarine carrying 154 Tomahawks made a rare port call at Subic Bay. And days later, a different Ohio-class submarine tested a Trident D5 missile off the coast of Florida, validating the US's nuclear deterrence. So what message are these powers, the US and the UK, trying to send?
I think, of course, first we understand it must be related to the upholding the freedom of navigation, right? But more importantly, I think this is also US new policy. They wanted to have this so-called government plan of change. So they want to have a strong military presence in Indo-Pacific region. And this time they visit to Manila, but they continue their trip to Ho Chi Minh City, right? So, and actually the original is from Korea as well. So it's kind of a part of their plan to have this journey around the maritime zone here. So I think this is very important, and also reflect they are going to increase their defense budget by 2027. I mean, for UK and the Philippines. I guess it's talking about the weapon manufacturing and the weapon industries, defense industries as well.
Right, yeah. So cooperating on the defense industrial base is very significant right now. Renato, I want to ask you about the, which was a little bit later, but the testing of that Trident D5 missile. Do you think that there was a coincidence there, or was there meant to be, the conjunction of the Ohio submarine in the Philippines together with the testing, the nuclear testing in a different location?
Well, when the United States Navy will order a nuclear attack submarines to surface, this is sending a signal. They usually will not order a ballistic missile submarine or attack submarines to surface if it's not necessary, if there's a sense of urgency. So this is what we call something unique. And I think the United States is sending a message. Both Russia and China, I think it's because of during the United Nations General Assembly, I think the United States under President Donald Trump noticed the fact that now the two nations, Russia and China, are not anymore aligning, they're already aligned. So in a way, it's a recognition of the fact that the United States and its allies are confronted by a Eurasian alignment. I won't still use the term alliance because there's no alliance, but an alignment.
Right.
So you have the surfacing of two U.S. ballistic missile attack submarines in the Pacific going to Subic Bay, which is, of course, a traditional U.S. ally, and, of course, another one firing Trident missiles.
So, Professor Lee, this strategic signaling that Renato mentioned from the U.S., is it a very welcome signal to this region, assuring allies of that extended deterrence?
Of course, there are some risks, right? As we know, we all are the scholars in international relations. We understand the security dilemma, right? So once you increase your military capability, the other power will increase their military in return, right? Capability in return. So that will not necessarily make you more secure. But if this is one part of deterrence strategy, you have to do that. So I really think that probably for the long-term security environment building or landscape building, we need to kind of have another mechanisms like to balance a little bit. But I don't know where the mechanism will become. But of course there are some risks. But it needs to be well managed. Yeah.
But in terms of in some of the media reports, sort of casting doubt on Donald Trump's administration's willingness to counter China. None of this has been substantiated. In this region, perhaps shifting to the US, is this a very welcome, development which has kind of put those doubts to rest?
But I think that's the other thing. On my way here, I also thought about this, right? So whether this is a good thing or bad, it also depends on how long will this continue. Okay, once U.S. and China, they have kind of improved their relations, probably everything will go back to another path. So whether UK or other, for instance, Canada or Australia, they also have the patrol, right? Especially across the Taiwan Strait. So whether that will continue all depends on the relations between China and U.S. So. Remain to be seen.
Okay, watch this space. Renato, the UK Visiting Services Agreement, the way the Daily Telegraph, the UK paper, put it was that there would be troops stationed in the South China Sea. That's not quite true, is it? They're not stationed. There's the presence of them, potentially.
Now, the Philippines and the United Kingdom have started negotiating for a reciprocal access or a status of forces agreement. Similar to what the Philippines has, of course, first with the United States, the Visiting Force Agreement. Then we have, of course, the Status of Forces Agreement with Australia. Then, of course, the one that took effect last month was a Reciprocal Access Agreement with Japan. So we're negotiating that, of course, with the United Kingdom. This is kind of unprecedented because you're talking about a NATO member state, which, of course, traditionally has been a historic sea power, now coming back to the region. And of course, you immediately see the reaction of China. China is basically accusing the Philippines of bringing NATO into the system. So in a way, it's Beijing that basically was able to read the tea leaves. So the fact that it's part of our strategy, given the fact that we don't have the military capability to face China, so we have to bring in the more, a case of the more the merrier. Of course, in the case if we will have a status of forces agreement with the UK, then we will have, of course, a security partnership with the UK. And of course, along with the UK, you don't have only NATO, you might even have AUKUS, south of Taiwan.
Very, very good point, yes. And that is why China is very concerned about this.
Yeah, you have to give them credit when being able to read the tea leaves.
Yes, okay. Now, Vietnam and the Philippines have just agreed to deepen their naval cooperation after a high-level meeting in late September. Vice Admiral Truong Thanh Nguyen, commander of the Vietnam People's Navy, remarked, "We share common interests as well as difficulties which we must address together for peace and stability." Philippine Navy Chief Vice Admiral Jose Maria Ambrosio Espeleta also said, "We help each other in many ways, particularly now that we share the same issues and concerns." Professor Lee, let me ask you. And also a Vietnam Coast Guard ship is visiting the Philippines to sort of strengthen their maritime cooperation. So on that Coast Guard level, that had already been developed. How do you read this naval cooperation now?
This they indicated the bilateral cooperations upgrade from very symbolism to a very real functional and operational cooperation. So of course, it's indicated the enhancement of the bilateral relations, right? This is one thing. But if you read into the details, at least from the materials I can get, they are still very low sensitive military cooperations, or even it's a maritime cooperations, including the Coast Guard. So not a very high level defense cooperation yet. So there's still a long way to go.
And is that because of China, Vietnam's consideration of China?
I think Vietnam, the approach of Vietnam is different from the Philippines that we all know, right? So of course they have to go step by step, cautiously. But the other thing probably we will see whether there will be a progress next year is the Philippines will be the chair of ASEAN next year. So probably both sides will work on something to talk together, strengthen the ASEAN's negotiation power to talk about the COC on the South China Sea. We hope that can come through.
So Renato, on that point from Professor, it's going to be a pivotal year, it seems, for ASEAN when Philippines takes over the leadership. And how important is that Vietnam relationship then for the Philippines?
Well, it's very important because, again, if you look at the Philippines, comparing it with the behavior of other ASEAN member states, the Philippines' position is kind of unique. We're the only country that's basically challenging China head-on, not only in the South China Sea, but also with the issue of Taiwan. Remember President Marcos' statement about Taiwan. Other ASEAN member states might raise issue about the South China, but definitely not about Taiwan. So we have been criticized by some of the ASEAN member states, except, of course, Vietnam. Vietnam, although might not have a certain disagreement with our action, like, for example, bringing in the United States, but Vietnam has always remained silent. So in a way, we have this very unique relation with Vietnam in terms of our overall relation with other ASEAN member states. So,
and is that purely on shared interest and the sort of the common threats?
I think it's really shared interest, not necessarily values, because at the end of the day, Vietnam is still ruled by a communist party.
So Professor Lee, to that point, Vietnam and China, both communist states, analysts have described the relationship, or the two of them, as being frenemies. Why is that?
Okay, so I think we have to understand Vietnam's foreign policy, or their principles for their foreign policy, right? So in addition to led by the Communist Party, they also have their own thinking on the regional strategies, especially in face of China's expansion there. Okay, so they have these four no's possible, right? Policy. One is no military alliance, no engagement with the country against a third country, and no foreign bases. Right, so it's very different from the Philippines, right? And no use of force. So all these are very cautious things. And relations to China, we know that they have been reiterate that South China Sea issue is not entire Vietnam-China relations. So in addition to that, they also have some other concerns, especially for communist regime. They wanted to have the stable regime. That's the very high priority for their strategy and policies.
Are the threats just related to the South China Sea, or does it go back actually much further back into their histories?
Okay, I don't think we have time to discuss about the history, but we can see the pattern. Okay, this is the so-called two-handed strategy, right? At one hand, they wanted to reduce the tension, but at the other hand, they also wanted to defend their interests. So, but at the same time, by doing this, they are also taking the risk. They are testing China's red line. Right. So, for instance, the recent expansion of the islands by Vietnam in the South China Sea as well. So, I think this is very interesting developing trend here. So, it's also worth watching that how far Vietnam can go, how far China can tolerate the expansion.
I mean, I heard that, and this is from a Vietnamese, that for 2,000 years they had been resisting China's sort of expansionist, sort of imperial desires for their territory.
So we understand that Vietnam carefully and skillfully dealing with that. Whenever China has a strong threat on them, they hold back. Okay, so it's very flexible. And of course, that's because of they understand that the relationship is very asymmetrical, right? Especially nowadays.
Right.
So.
Renato, sort of linked to that, I'm very fascinated about this relationship between the Philippines and Vietnam, because as we know, we've sort of CSIS has been recording Vietnam is actively building in the Spratlys, in the South China Sea, but the Philippines keeps a very pragmatic approach to Vietnam's island building. Can you explain it to us?
For two reasons. Number one, the Vietnamese are only building structures in the island that they occupied. They're not concerned of other islands. So for them, we have this and we will protect it. And of course, Vietnam does not claim the whole of the South China Sea. So for us, that makes
it does claim parts of the Spratlys, which is in the West Philippines.
Yeah, but not the entire.
Right.
And of course, that's why, in a way, we understand the Vietnamese position. Plus, of course, in the past, for example, there was an incident that happened in 2019 where you have a suspected Chinese maritime militia boat ramming and sinking a Filipino fishing vessel, and the crew members were left. They were rescued by the Vietnamese. So this is something that we could never forget about how the Vietnamese extended their hand when we needed it most. So again, plus of course, the Vietnamese also give very much importance to the Philippines in terms of our being members of ASEAN. So for them, ASEAN is very important. The Philippines is very important because we're part of ASEAN. For us, this is usually what I say to my Filipino countrymen. The best way to know about how to deal with China is to learn from the Vietnamese because they have dealt with the Chinese for thousands of years. And this is something that we value from the Vietnamese every time they tell us how to deal with the Chinese. The Chinese will say one thing and do another.
Professor Lee, let's move now to how you would compare the ties between Taiwan and Vietnam and Taiwan and the Philippines. It would seem to be a world of difference.
Of course, this has to be dependent on their own policies. I mean, Vietnam and the Philippines policy, right? But I do think that we share more common things with the Philippines than the Vietnam. Okay, put aside the political system. Okay, the different things about democracy and communist party. But in terms of the climate challenge we faced, we do share a lot of climate challenges with the Philippines. So I think in Taiwan's relations with the Philippines, in addition to economic ties, I think what we really have to cooperate or collaborate is on these search and rescue missions. So I think this is definitely different from the Vietnam side. We know that currently we have strong economic relations with Vietnam, but at other political security level is much lower than the Philippines.
And Renato, Taiwan and the Philippines have moved a lot more closer together. Do you think that Taiwan has any opportunity to do that a little bit more with Vietnam?
I attended a conference in Hanoi, and of course, I raised the issue of the fact that we're concerned with what would happen with Taiwan in 2027, primarily because of geographic proximity. Plus, of course, as a U.S. treaty ally, whether we, as President Marcos said, we will be dragged. When I raised this to the Vietnamese look at me with a blank stare. For them, this is still very distant for them. Of course, they also don't want to antagonize China, given the fact that this is something that they always tell us. We don't trust the Chinese, but we have to take two factors. Number one, we share a land border with China, and number two, of course, we're still ruled by a communist party. So again, especially when it comes to the issue of Taiwan, a possibility of a Taiwan contingency, the Vietnamese will do their very best to stay out of this. Whether in the case of the Philippines, as President Marcos said, we will be dragged kicking and shouting.
Okay, which reinforces again how the Philippines is really Taiwan's strongest friend in the region. Thank you so much to my guests, Chong-Li Lee and Renato Cruz de Castro, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.